Hi all, welcome back to Make More Bonsai, John here. In today's video, we're going to do something kind of fun. Well, fun if you're into this kind of thing, bonsai kind of stuff. We have here a Chinese elm, Ulmus parvifolia. It was grown from seed and it spent its whole life in a pot, something like 16 years or so. I know, fun, right? But that's not the kind of fun we're going to have today. Back to the elm. It was only recently potted into a bonsai container, transplanted from a plastic growing pot about 2 years ago. During the 14 years previous, it had received some basic guidance as a bonsai and has developed into a pretty nice single-trunk, attractively branched little tree. In fact, one could simply be happy with the tree and enjoy decades of bonsai joy as it is. Really, on a base level, if you're happy with the way your bonsai looks, then mission accomplished. Yeah, it really is up to you. But that was the old me, like last year's version of me. But then I got to thinking, we can do better. By we, I mean the tree and me. If we take a closer look, you can see the history of this tree is spelled out by its scars throughout the length of the trunk all the way to the top. Over the years, I've been trimming this back and rebuilding the apex in an effort to keep it roughly this height, and over the years that has been a successful effort really, but now at the ripe old age of 16ish, we can see some trouble is a-brewing. Because it has been in a pot its whole life, that trunk is not particularly wide, which is fine. It's in proportion with the height and all that, but further up the trunk we can see some flaws that can take you out of the happy place of a well-proportioned tapering trunk that is widest at the base and ever more narrow as you view it up through the apex. That taper has reached a point in which it's about as wide at the base as it is at the top, which is to say, no taper at all. This is fueled by the scars that have developed every time it was reduced, making some bulging scar tissue in the upper half of the tree. It's at the point in which if something else were pruned off, the top will be wider than the base. This reverse taper effect really messes with the fun illusion of a large tree and miniature kind of aesthetic we're always reaching for with a bonsai. Combined with that fact that this trunk is now about the same width all the way through, it's time to rethink this tree. So, what to do? Plant it in the ground. I mean, sure, accelerating some kind of trunk thickening, then cutting it back is a viable way to go, but it does not really answer the challenge, so to speak. It has been growing in a pot its whole life to keep it small. Blowing it up by planting it in the ground now feels like admitting defeat. It feels bad. This is bonsai. Bonsai is supposed to feel good. Okay, new plan. Cut it back to one of the lower branches and redesign it. Sure, that's an option. Chinese elms are pretty fast growing, and I'm sure we can shape this into something really cool. Frankly, this is a viable option. One that is totally doable in a reasonable amount of time, but that doesn't really answer the challenge. It does, however, help us identify what the challenge really is. So here's the challenge. A Chinese elm, pot-grown its entire life, has yielded some attractive lower branching and a natural and somewhat lyrical curve. Yeah, I'm calling it a lyrical curve. I'm biased. I've been liking the way this tree looks for a long time on my bench. Okay, so I've identified what I like about the tree. Now, what do I want? If we look at some elm trees or deciduous trees in general, very often they kind of split with a branch or two reaching up as a trunk extension. This imagery evokes a strong connection with nature, it's comfortable, and it really does feel like a tree. I want this tree to look more natural, not stylized with a twisty trunk. Just capture that simple elegance of a large tree in miniature kind of illusion. Okay, so back to the challenge. A Chinese elm, pot-grown its entire life, which has yielded some attractive lower trunk branching and a natural and somewhat lyrical curve that splits into multiple branch trunks like many deciduous trees do, that keeps it in proportion with the trunk width from its whole life in a pot, so on the small side. Oh, and achievable in maybe 5 years. Yeah, that's doable. It will definitely improve upon the existing design for sure. So, to get this party started, let's clear away some of the upward growing secondary branches and clear up some space around what might be the ideal area to begin this regrowth of trunks from. I really would like to keep that curve in the lower trunk as a relevant aspect of the design, so the branches need to exist in that area for this overall design to work. After clearing away all the excess, we can see all the scars and how they're becoming such a distraction within the composition. The lower trunk looks great until that midpoint, and then it becomes bulge city with hardly any taper. This approach may seem drastic, but in the long run it will improve the look and feel of that lower trunk. I'm going to make that trunk reduction roughly 1.5 inches above that fourth branch. This will allow any back budding that occurs some space to make choices a few months from now when they've all extended. Once that large part is removed, it's time to consider where do we want any scarring to be. Because this trim will leave a hefty scar, I'm going to angle this cut away from the front view. Chinese elm and a lot of deciduous trees have a tendency to create buds very close to a cut site. This aggressive growth habit is from a fast-moving metabolism, which will really work in our favor over the next few months. As soon as the callus begins to form, a Chinese elm will switch from healing mode to budding mode very fast and begin to form buds all over that area. From that moment forward, the new design will begin to emerge. Let's take a side quest for a sec and discuss just how aggressive and strong Chinese elms really are, which is what makes them a great species for bonsai as well. This tree was repotted into this pot about 2.5 years ago. While repotting was taking place, there were a few really thick roots that were trimmed off to make it fit into the container. Among those roots, a few of them were transplanted into a pot to create root cuttings. Essentially, a root cutting is exactly what the name says. It's like taking a branch cutting, but from a root. This is easily performed in early spring before buds break, and much like any deciduous tree, it soon began to create leaf buds on the area that is above the soil. One of those root cuttings has been featured here on this channel as a clump group planting. That one has been growing in a bonsai pot. Here's one that I transplanted in the ground 1 year after the root cutting was made. This tree is entering its 3rd year and is over 15 feet tall and well on its way to becoming a shade tree over my bonsai bench. Here's another one that was placed in the ground last year after wiring a slight curve into the trunk. Here's yet another one from the very same group of cuttings. Depending on the conditions, a Chinese elm will adapt to the confines of a bonsai pot really well, and if given all the resources it can take, it will pretty much explode with growth. The root cuttings from one little tree produced 3 different new bonsai projects and a shade tree in under 3 years. Pretty cool, right? You can see why I have all the confidence in the world that this redesign project will be successful and an improvement. Let's fast forward a month and a half and see what our project has produced. This tree has begun to send out new growth from the branches where buds were already in place. There is also evidence of new buds forming around the cut area. Chinese elms waste no time getting to the business of leaf production. During this time, I will be looking for buds in a location that will best serve the overall design concept of 2 new main branch trunks in the upper half of the tree. Once they are identified, any other buds in that area will be removed to help direct energy to those beneficial branches and prevent excess swelling. Let's look at a top-line quick explanation of what's going on around that cut site. Once that top was removed, the tree realized there was an injury to that area. How? Above that cut site were a bunch of branches, and each of those branches had buds that were calling for resources through the hormones within those buds called auxin and cytokinin. Auxin suppresses growth along a branch and favors the apical bud that resides at the end of a branch. It's a chemical signal that says to grow in this direction and encourages cell division through the use of cytokinin focused on that area. By removing all the information the tree was receiving, we interrupted the influence auxin had on growth suppression. Cytokinin is now free to start dividing cells in the cambium layer to grow over that cut, and along with that cell division message comes the formation of buds. So why only a max of 2 buds? That area is being flooded with resources to heal and close over that large cut site. An aggressive amount of vascular tissue is forming to accelerate the closure of the wound. This results in the swelling of that area. If left unchecked, it can create a wide reverse taper that will kind of spoil the illusion we're trying to achieve within a bonsai. The wider at the base, narrow all the way to the top of the tree. We do want branches to grow there, but by keeping it to 1 or 2, the flow of nutrients are limited, which also helps to slow down the swelling, making the area manageable within the new design. The way I describe it, it may seem like this is some kind of panic-inducing situation that requires instant reaction. The reality is, this happens over the course of 4 to 6 weeks, so if you check on your tree every other day, you'll be able to recognize the signs and be able to manage it. Bonsai is supposed to be fun. Now back to the fun. I want this tree to gain as much strength as it can to support the new branches when they emerge, so there'll be no trimming until summer, at least 6 months from the initial trunk chop, to allow the new branches to gain as much foliage possible to feed them. Since the initial trunk removal, 6 months have now passed, and we can see this tree is fully recovered and spreading out far and wide. All of those leaves have been providing energy to heal the large cut and also support those 2 main new upward growing branches that were selected and allowed to grow out, lengthen, and get strong. This is now the time to manage the growth rate of the 2 sections of the tree. The bottom section, which has some well-formed ramified branches, and the new top section we're developing into a forked, more natural-looking deciduous tree. For the bottom section, we will slow down the growth by pruning the branches back to all but 2 leaves on each branch. This will effectively pause the flow of nutrients through those branches, as that area will shift gears to producing new buds on the remaining branches. Why 2 leaves? Well, you could just have 1 if you want, but I want choices when autumn comes. 2 leaves will each have a bud at their base that will potentially make a new branch. From this development perspective, the more branches to choose from that support the design, the more opportunities I will have to refine the tree as the tree develops. I'm also removing any new growth that is growing straight down, or up for that matter, favoring mostly lateral growth. Also, of that lateral growth, favoring growth that is growing outward from the trunk. In time, these will be secondary and tertiary branches for ramification. This reduction in call for water and nutrients will make the tree send those resources to the top section. Now, for that top section, I want the exact opposite to happen here. I want those 2 branches to extend as far as possible with no interruption to the flow of water and nutrients within those branches. This will help to fatten those extensions to create a natural transition from the lower trunk to the division above. This will also help heal over that large cut, and as they grow, they will kind of catch up with the swelling in that area. Now's a great time to begin styling some structure into these branches. I'm not really sure how much of these extensions will be used in the final design, but I think it would be wise to take advantage of the youth and flexibility of these young branches to give them some dimension. Using aluminum wire, I'm going to create some soft, natural-looking bends. This is to harmonize with the existing trunk below. There's a curve in the lower trunk that indicates some elements are at play in its environment that caused that curve to happen. These are going to be mirrored in the upper parts, but more subtle, to make these new branches look like they're part of the same tree. I'm wiring one to move sort of forward and one to move sort of backward. This will add a 3-dimensional depth to them and the tree when it's fully branched out. Bonsai is a 3D art form. It's important to be mindful of this and create multiple planes forward and backward throughout the tree. If we take a look at the initial cut site, we can see there is a clean collar forming in the back of the tree all around the cut site. And we can see where those new branches originated, right along the collar where the cambium and its undifferentiated cells would push out scar tissue to heal the cut and new buds as well. The collar will close up really well since the new branches are pulling resources along the length of that scar to feed them. This is all the work to do at this point of the year in this tree. These branches will be left to run as long as possible through summer. I will keep an eye on the wire and remove it as soon as it begins to cut into the branches. They will be growing really fast now, and all that energy is being channeled into them. In about a month, I'll trim the branch on the right to slow it down. I don't want these branches to be equal in width. This is to contribute to building asymmetry into the design. One of these will be more dominant and one will be a secondary support element. Sometime around the end of September, I will trim the dominant branch as well, to stop from extending any further. Why? Sort of the same processes were in action earlier this year when the top was removed, to interrupt the auxin hormones that are gathered in that apical bud at the end of a 3-foot-long branch. I want to encourage some buds to form in the new branches. By activating the cytokinin again on these new extensions for more cell division in that area, this will help to form new buds to choose from in the coming spring. A few months later, we are now in winter, mid-January. We can see the start of the new design taking place in the form of 2 new upward branch trunks. We can see one has a wider circumference than the other. This is because we slowed one down earlier in summer by trimming it and allowing one to become dominant. The dominant one was also trimmed a few months later. If we check out that cut site, it is working hard to seal that big wound and is probably going to be completely closed by the end of the year. So, in this past year, we assessed an existing, pretty okay looking bonsai, found some flaws that, after careful consideration, needed correction, identified the challenge, and worked out a plan to update the look of the tree and make a more sustainable design that will take it through the next 10 years on a journey of improvement and bonsai-related fun. I can't wait to see what this Chinese elm has to offer for us next year. For now, it needs to remain dormant and wait until spring arrives. I'll be overwintering this tree on the ground. Winter is pretty mild here in Texas, but if you're further north, some protection may be required, especially if temperatures drop to single digits for weeks at a time. Most of the stuff I post here is about a single session with a tree. I do plan to keep delivering videos like that, but I'm also trying to create a few videos that follow a tree through a few seasons and multiple styling sessions. so the results are delivered in the same video. Please let me know in the comments below if you like this approach. It'll help me plan future videos. Thanks for watching. I hope you gained some helpful insights from this little video. Maybe like and subscribe and leave a comment below, and possibly check out the book or the t-shirt and hat links in the Show More section below. Your participation and support really helps energize this little production and helps me dream up new stuff to show you, as well as tickle the tummy of the YouTube algorithm to ensure this stuff lands on more people's suggested videos. Because bonsai stuff is kinda cool, and so are you for helping support this channel.